10 good minutes on a Tuesday before the new year. So I want to start with Cleveland. They are the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference. They're 18-16, 520 winning percentage. Last year, they had a 780 winning percentage. They were the 1 seed in the East. We know how great they were. For them to match last year's record, they'd have to go 46-2. That's probably not going to happen, but I still believe in this team as far as there being a run. We know that they've had a bunch of different injury issues, starting lineup numbers that we'll get to. Brian Windhorst was on the podcast, and he was terrific just breaking down, like, here's the shooting that's missing because the shooting numbers fell off a cliff from last year to this year. Here are the guys that are out. The Lonzo thing has not worked out, and Darius Garland has been up and down. But they get a really nice win last night in San Antonio. I even, going back to the Christmas game against New York where they got it big, I was like, okay, this is starting to be what it's supposed to look like. But I thought last night against San Antonio was what it's supposed to look like. Mobley only missed 2 weeks, came back sooner than you'd expected. So he, Allen, Garland, Mitchell are all out there, Hunter, Sam Merrill, and tightening up the rotation a little bit with some of these other names that, believe it or not, there's like a lot of guys on this team that I really like. So the full 4 last night in effect, I guess you could say the full 5 with Hunter. They shot it really well last night. They just looked terrific. If you look at the 3-point shooting numbers from last year, they were number 2 in the league at 38%. At one point, they were 28th in the league when I was tracking it. They're now 22nd from 3. And that hasn't necessarily been better in December either. The thing about what your 3-point ranking is as far as league-wide, if you go from 34% as a team to 36% as a team, you can find yourself in the top 10. The defensive numbers last year, they were 8th. They were the number 1 offense in the NBA last year. They're 14th on defense this year. They're 10th on offense. There's probably some rebounding stuff that you could say is an issue, but you just look at some of these stats and you're like, well, what am I judging? Like, am I judging all these different starting lineups, or am I judging what I think the team can be? And that's what I default to, is like, hey, look, I'm not picking them to win a title necessarily, but I'd expect them to be a really tough out if they're fully formed in the playoffs in the East. So there's probably a little bit too much Donovan Mitchell. If you look at the traditional numbers, they're just massive, 29, 5, 5.5. The shooting splits, 49, 39. It's the highest usage of his Cleveland run, right around what his career high usage was, going back to a couple of those Utah years. But I don't really blame him because I think there's so much about Mitchell that I like. I think if we wanted to be critical of him, we could all argue that there's maybe a layer to him that feels like he can force it a little, but God, when it's going, it's so you'd hate to tell a guy like, hey, I don't want you having those moments where you're just completely unstoppable with some of the shot selection stuff. But do you really blame him? When you look at this team where they've had 18 different starting lineups in 34 games, they had 23 different starting lineups last year for the entire season. They blow that lead to New York on Christmas. They were up 17 in the fourth quarter. Offensive rebounds, part of the issue. The Knicks in that spot are going to be a really tough team to kill at home on Christmas anyway. And Hunter, who has been bad, just straight up bad this year, who, remember, like, them trading for him last year, it was pretty obvious. The idea was they probably internally talked about, like, if we're going to be facing Boston in the Eastern Conference playoffs here, we have to figure out a way to have some kind of bigger body perimeter player, as opposed to just guys switching into Garland and Mitchell and taking turns, especially the way Boston would run their offense, and even, hoping to get Jarrett Allen in. I think they probably would have benched Jarrett Allen to close a hypothetical Boston, but look, both those teams get eliminated, so we don't have to worry about that. But the idea was, at least Hunter, from just a body matching size kind of type philosophy, was like, can we just have any kind of big wing that also can stretch the floor and shoot, because he's not going to have the ball in his hands a ton between what you have with Mitchell, Garland, and Mobley. So Hunter had just been awful so far this season shooting. So if you look at the splits, 41, 31%, and this is somebody who the last 2 years shot 41 and 39% from 3. So that number has to get better. And again, I thought he looked good last night, plus 14 in the box score. Jalen Tyson was terrific. I like Dean Wade. I like Proctor. I like Sam Merrill. And I know the Lonzo thing's been a mess, but, there's still, Strus isn't this good, right? He's a nice option to have, but God. So, they've never had a bad record. It's just a disappointing record when you look at what our expectations were for Cleveland. But the inconsistencies, the lack of shooting, trying to figure out who you are night from night, So it'd be kind of nice because this team is really expensive. It's the most expensive team in the NBA. They're the only team in the second apron, which just limits anything you can really do in the trade market as far as being able to aggregate salaries or take back more money or send money out. And as of right now, their 2032 first round draft pick is frozen. Something that I noticed last night also with San Antonio. I have a huge San Antonio rant. I maybe do a mild version of it right now, and I mean a real positive thing. It would have been better after the third OKC win where they beat the Thunder 3 times in 12 days, but then they lost to the Jazz. There was no Fox in that game, but still. And just as an aside, the Utah Jazz are so much fun to watch. This Keontae George thing is incredible. Like, he's a stud, and he's so calm, and there's this flow to him where, anybody that's ever when you look at like fighters and stuff, and there's just kind of this moment where everything just kind of connects and it flows, and they're not in a hurry about anything, and they're just completely in command of what they're doing. There's a similarity in the way I watch Keontae George play basketball right now, where he's just like, all right, that Spurs win, there was a 9-0 run in the fourth quarter by San Antonio, and you're like, all right, this is probably over. Like, Utah's going to blow this. And Keontae immediately draws a foul, kind of calms everybody down, gets to the free throw line. It was just like an incredible vet move on top of just how incredibly efficient this guy is, with a big spike in usage, volume, whatever you want to say. And I love that Larry Markkinen was, look, it's not going to work going at Wemby. It wouldn't be a great long-term plan, but there's like 4 times where it felt like he went right at him. The one time is humiliating. Wemby blocked him where it felt like the defender couldn't even possibly be in position to block him again. And then there was another time where he got him late. So look, just an aside, I really enjoy watching the Jazz. Hopefully for their sake, they end up not being too good, because it'd be brutal if that pick ends up like at number 9. And then OKC ends up with their pick because of a salary dump transaction from before. That's the old favors deal. But there's something here with Wemby that, I think all of us that are watching him this much are noticing him. If you looked at Wembanyama against the Cavs, it's basically Mobley and Allen. And as great as Mobley is defensively, it's still a huge ask for any of these bigger guys. And, I'm talking about like anyone that could play center, like really play center. And that would be Mobley if Allen weren't there. And maybe they wouldn't want to do that, whatever. That's a different discussion. But the Wembanyama drives that we were seeing at the beginning of the year, you've seen the league adjust to go to this kind of perimeter dog, that you hope you can kind of assign to him. And he's going to wreck you, and he's going to wreck you even if he doesn't score any points because of what he's doing defensively. But there are teams now that I'm looking at, like certain matchup stuff, to be something to look at there with the playoffs, where the preferred thing is, do we have an undersized guy that gets up and underneath him? It used to be something that you used to try to do with Dirk, and then Dirk would just shoot it over you the entire time. But I've noticed it in different matchups, because if you look at what he did against Utah, Wembanyama had 32. There was no guy that fits that profile for Utah, even with all the things that they're trying to figure out with their roster. There isn't the guy that you're like, all right. And I'm not talking just about Alex Caruso, because Jalen Williams will play on him a little bit as well. I'm going back to those Washington games and watching it. Like, Coulibaly was the primary assignment. I think Champagne got stuck with him a couple times. He got run over on one play, and he's just looking around being like, is this really the plan? But yeah, it is the plan. But look specifically for like big Wembanyama scoring nights. If there's a team they're going up against that doesn't necessarily have somebody that fits the profile that we're talking about here. Again, he had 32 against Utah. So there was a lot of times it's like, well, Nurkic is just on him. So now we're back to that early stuff in the beginning of the year where he's going to be driving. He had 26 against San Antonio. That's in 28 and 27 minutes. Against OKC, 22 and 21 minutes, 12 and 23 minutes, 19 and 26 minutes. The Washington numbers were down a little bit. So just something to look at there. But if I were going to I'll have a chance to do this again, but the overall thing with San Antonio, I love. They're letting Castle run the offense. De'Aaron Fox is playing off the ball more than I think I've ever seen, other than maybe the times he had to watch Zach LaVine decide that the game was his for an entire quarter. The Harper part of it, when Fox is out, it's like, okay, cool, we have another ball handler here. There's something about this team that feels very OKC-ish, in that if you look at the decision-making that OKC does with their rosters, it's like, we want guys, if they have the ball in their hands, can shoot, can dribble, and can pass. We want an entire group of people. It'd be great if we had 5, even better if we have 10, and it feels like OKC wants 15 of these guys. where no matter what, you don't get stuck with the ball. And it kind of goes back to some of that early death lineup stuff that you had with Golden State, where it felt like everybody was comfortable with the basketball, including Draymond Green, who's playing center back then. That Toronto run where they won the finals in 19, you would watch them and be like, you know what? No one really here feels like, this dead end with the basketball. It feels like there's multiple options that are open for them. And clearly that's what OKC has done here by design. But when you run out Wemby, when you run out Harrison Barnes, if you want to go Fox, if you want to go Harper, if you want to go Castle, and then there's my guy, Keldon Johnson, who I'll admit there's a lot of times in the couch the last few years to be like, why do you like this guy? What is it about Keldon Johnson? I don't know if you've seen the numbers, but he's even better than I thought. And he's been terrific. And he plays bigger than he is. He's still only 26, I think. And I was looking at the win share per 48, which again, you can attack some of these numbers if you want to, but generally when you see Jokic and SGA just off the charts in comparison to the entire league, and they are off the charts. By the way, prayers up, Jokic. Watching that injury last night live against Miami, teammate steps on him, hyperextends that knee. And I want to emphasize this. I want to be nice. A truly awful job by the Heat broadcast on that injury. We can see he's barely going to be able to stand up on his own. And we already have the replay. So we can go to the replay whenever you want. Instead, they cut away from the live part of it where you're on the couch being like, I want to see what he looks like trying to walk off of the court. And we don't see any of that because they run the injury like 7 or 8 times. And this isn't one of those like sensitive, don't show the player injury thing. That's not what I'm saying at all. We could have watched the replay as much as they wanted to give it to us because we already had it. And instead of watching the live reaction to seeing Jokic get carried off of the court, we're watching a replay like 7 or 8 times. Horrible job by the Heat broadcast. All right. Maybe I'm just bitter because I'm worried that we're not going to see Jokic for an extended period of time. So back to that win share 48. It's Jokic, again, an absurd number. Like it would be the all-time number. I don't know if he's going to keep that up all year long. SGA is terrific. So then you look at the rest. You're like, hey, weren't you talking about Keldon Johnson? He's 9th in the NBA in this number. This is a big boy number. Like this is the number where you're like, oh, hey, there's Brunson, there's Luka, there's Durant, there's Kawhi, who went off again. This number usually doesn't lie to you very often, unless it's a big who's asked to do very limited things offensively. See Mark Williams being 3rd overall, Luke Cornett, Duren, Hartenstein. So if you actually go through this number here and Keldon being 9th, he's 4th among guys that are actually asked to do something here on offense. And he's asked to do a lot and he's just terrific. So like, I just love that, a player that I liked before the draft, a player that I liked a little bit early on. And then he just felt like he was in every single trade scenario. And, you're just like, oh, so this guy that we kind of liked and we extended and now he sucks because he's been extended. So Keldon numbers, the shooting, terrific. I'm curious when we're going to get a Cam Thomas trade request. I know he just got back from injury. He's only played 2 games this month. Last night against Golden State, watching that one, Brooklyn decided to close without him. They went with the UNC rookie Drake Powell, who was just a dog trying to defend against Steph Curry. Off the ball, denial, whole thing, just like in his jersey, 35 feet away from the hoop, even if he didn't have, wasn't even looking at the basketball. So I can't imagine Cam Thomas is going to love that scenario. And MPJ's been great for them. And how about our guy, Dioman, once we learn how to pronounce it, 23 points last night, 7 of 14 on threes, plenty of practice on threes. If you remember the first 4 games of his career, he took 22 shots. All of them were threes. It wasn't until the 5th game where he actually took a 2. But the knock on him was, hey, 6'8", handling. Like when I first watched him, I'm like, God, there's so much about this guy I kind of like. And then you watch him shoot and go, I don't even know if this is going to happen. He's 39% on threes in the month of December. Again, 6'8", 19 years old. If he's going to shoot it like that, and the way he kind of sees the game, ball handling, that kind of stuff, could be something there with the Nets. By the way, do you know who the best defensive team in the NBA is in the month of December? Where Brooklyn at? The Brooklyn Nets, 2.5 points better per 100 possessions than the OKC Thunder. So we had news over the weekend that Trae Young was, I guess, more available than he's been, because this has been kind of a 2-year odyssey here. During the DeJounte Murray offseason, not the year they brought him in from San Antonio, but the year he went out to the Pelicans, By the way, I can't wait until there's another guard on the Pelicans, so I don't have to watch these Jordan Poole threes that I've been watching the last week. Borrego, tough spot there, closing group. They lose the game to the Knicks, fought their ass off. But if you're running on a lineup with Fears, who got really just stuck, screwed up a few times there offensively, OG just kind of ate him up there a little bit. And I'm not even talking like on moves. I'm just talking about standing at the top of the 3-point line and being like, where's the entry pass? And he had a huge turnover in one of those games. But if you have Zion, Fears, and then Queen, Jalen Brunson's like, how do you guys want me to get 20 in the fourth quarter here? And then they would take out Fears and they put in Poole, and you're like, all right. And Poole is just, I mean, he's had 3 games now in the past week where you're just thinking, somebody asked me, like, do you think they're showcasing him? I'm like, I don't even think that's possible to showcase Jordan Poole at this point. So anyway, back to the trade market thing here with Trae, because I think that he's been available. There was kind of that year with DeJounte where it was like, look, if there's another deal they like better for Trae, then they would do that one and then keep DeJounte Murray. Granted, DeJounte blew out the Achilles, but there might be revisionist history that, like, but again, the market, look, if the market were really good for him, I think he would have been traded already. So now he's available all over again. Apparently, Russillo is going to be available as well. I do look forward to when I'm watching the broadcast of whatever team Russillo is on, if he's traded and then he hits a 3 in the corner and then the local broadcast is like, you know, the guy was the number 1 overall pick. So, and they just sit there and agree and get all excited and he scores 12 points a game. Although I thought he had a nasty block last night in a very competitive game against OKC. Trae didn't play last night, quad contusion, I guess. He's played in 10 games this year. They're 2-8 in the 10 games. You know, he's still 27. So again, if a new team does end up with Trae Young, it'd be like, he's still only 27, but we know what he is. And I did wonder in that Knicks game where Trae did play, if Quinn Snyder was going to have the balls to not close with Trae Young coming back into the game, but he did. He brought him back in at 450. I don't really think that was the reason they necessarily lost this game, but we know what it is. We know what it is with Trae. We know that it's a limited thing. You know, I could get really nasty, and I talk about this all the time with, like, when you have this job, I think all of us are worse at it in the last 10 plus years talking for a living, because very often we'll end up talking to a certain fan base or someone in particular because we're all reading stuff. Hey, you know, this is what I think about this. And you look at your mentions and you're just like, okay. And then you start to like almost take it personally, even if you do a good job being numb to it most of the time. But the Atlanta thing has happened now for me because I was probably, I think, the first guy that was on it that was like, hey, these points and everything are cool, but this is not winning basketball. This is not going to be a long-term solution. But it was a short-term solution because he was such a fan favorite and everybody was so excited about it. And ownership, I think, is still a little on board. I'm like, are we sure we want to move like our star attraction? And if you want to win a basketball at this point, you have to move on. I don't even know if anybody's even debating this thing anymore. So I asked somebody in the NBA, we'll do this every week on this, I said, just give me a kind of breakdown of the Trae Young trade market. So, quote, it's hard to think of a team that's trying to win this season that Trae would help, especially once you factor in what that team would be losing from the players they would have to send back as matching salary. He doesn't defend. He doesn't rebound. Guys hate playing with him. I asked if there was any understanding of the price. Quote, I have no idea. And essentially just kind of paraphrasing everything here, where it's like he sells tickets, he sells jerseys, ownership may be more open to it, but again, I think there's a hurdle there. And then he asked me, can you name one team that's trying to win that Trae would help? And that therein lies the problem. Is there a reset of Trae Young where he looks around going, man, the team, I scored all these points and they didn't want me, and now I had to go somewhere else. So maybe now I need to figure out a way to fit in a little bit more. And I think we may be years or / impossible number of years away from him having that realization. Because sure, he can shoot. If you pair other defensive players around him a little bit, he breaks the paint really well, the lobs and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he is an incredibly talented guy. I do think there's like a 25% production boost based on the way he's been officiated. Like from the jump, I'm like, this is how you're going to officiate this guy for his entire career? Like, make the plaque now then. This is a fucking joke, because it's not even the free throw attempts. It's that, so I can't do anything around this guy. Between he and Brunson, it makes me think that if I were a front office, I'd go, hey, are there small guys that we think are pretty good with the ball, great shooters that we think are just going to give the benefit of the doubt with the way the game is called for some of these smaller players? Like, if you have a second round grade on this guy, maybe he's a first rounder just because we think the way the big small disparity is and the way they're officiating, like some of these guys again are going to have careers that they never would have had decades ago because the officials would have just laughed at you. So that is the biggest issue here with any kind of Trae Young market. Even if you like the price, kind of back to the Bradley Beal thing, where look, the Beal thing for Phoenix is disaster. It wasn't free. I think when I talked about it at the time, even though I've never liked Beal, really, I mean, I liked him before the draft, but with Beal, you want to talk about somebody who's never been more comfortable being the third option. Be like, hell, I'll be fourth option tonight. So like maybe you'd rather a Trae who would never mentally defer in that way. But even if the Trae Young price is like a real first and then sort of a fake first, and you're dumping salary that you don't even need, and you go, hey, from an asset, talent, acquisition, all that kind of stuff, like we're marginally better. And that's what this game is about, building a roster, trying to figure out like, hey, I'm grabbing this kind of asset, but what's the pricing of this asset? Because you're dealing with a lot of shit. You're dealing with somebody who's going to be coming in, who's not going to think he's done anything wrong and is immediately going to be out there hoping to get his 30, hoping to get his free throws, bunch of assists along the way. And it has never been winning basketball for him. So I did this last night instead of, by the way, hit us up with questions, NBA mailbag, rr@gmail.com. I did this poll last night because I thought it was a better way to do this than some of the questions. Who would you rather have? 20,000 votes. Here are your options. Ja, Zion, Trae, Embiid. Zion is winning right now at 37%. Trae is number 2 at 31%. Ja is third at 17%. Embiid last at 15%. Last at 15%. I actually think that's right. Like at least with Zion, this is kind of the Zion, it's a bigger Trae conversation. It's a Ja conversation. But at least with Zion, I don't necessarily have to hand him the keys. Now, Trae's the healthiest other than this recent stretch. He's the healthiest by far of all of these guys, okay? Embiid has the worst contract probably in the NBA. But if you look at Zion, who was really good last night, you're not just going, okay, you're in charge of all of our offensive possessions on top of us not really knowing like what your deal is. So that's probably the answer, even though there's a million reasons why you can talk yourself out of any of these guys.